So in last week's video, I talked about how stocks get manipulated. We shouldn't shy away from those stocks. These hot stocks can make massive gains. You can see here on screen LUCY, which had this great run. The question is, what are the characteristics of these stocks and how do you find them early enough to make big profits? Well, that's this week's topic. Plus, I'll do my normal market analysis and we'll look at the trade of the week on BNAI. So why are some stocks hot while most are not? Well, the key thing is to understand the characteristics of these hot stocks. They tend to be lower price stocks without a lot of shares available to trade. We call that the float. So how many shares are in the float tells you how many shares are available to be bought, and if there's a lower supply of shares available, if the float is low, then it's much easier to manipulate those stocks higher. So, some stocks only have 8 million shares in the float and they're trading at 30 cents. There's just not a lot of shares to be bought. And so as I talked about last week in that manipulation video, a promotion group can find a stock without a lot of shares outstanding and push it up by bringing in lots of buyers without a lot of supply of stock. That stock can go up quite sharply. So low price stocks with low floats, and you can find out the float, just Google share floats. FinViz is a good source for that. I use TradeStation. It tells me the float for a stock. And I like, anything under 50 million shares is a low float, but anything really under 300 or 400 million has potential if it's a low price stock. So those low float stocks have the tendency to make these bigger moves. They tend to be lower priced. But what is the characteristic that is absolutely key? Well, that is abnormal volume and price gain. So we call that abnormal activity. These are the footprints of alpha. I always talk about alpha stocks in these videos. Alpha stocks are those that are trading on their own story. They have something exciting happening, whether it's real or not, and they can make these big moves because that exciting story attracts a crowd. And so what I look for are stocks that were kind of boring, just trading normally, and then they come alive with abnormal price and abnormal volume. I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute, and then at the end of the video, I'll show you another example from Friday's trading. And it's very obvious if you know what to look for. They're boring, they're quiet, and they come alive with abnormal activity. I've built indicators to find those. That's the action candle indicator that you hear me talk about on these videos all the time. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you can get those weekly videos. It's all free and you'll learn lots from that. So these action candle stocks that make these action candles, they're showing abnormal activity, abnormal volume, abnormal price. They have typically low floats. They're typically low price stocks. And the final thing is they're very liquid. Now, when I say liquid, what I mean is that they're actively traded. They're making a lot of trades in a day. So what is actively traded? Well, anything more than 20,000 trades a day, I would consider to be quite active. But some of these stocks will trade hundreds of thousands of times in a day. So imagine you have a stock that doesn't have very many shares outstanding, so it's a low float stock. It's trading abnormally, and it's trading 200,000 times a day. So it has a huge crowd chasing after relatively few shares available. Now you see why these stocks can make these price gains of 100%, 200%, 500% in a single day. So we go back to LUCY, which made this big move on May 24th, and it's made some moves since then as well. But what I want you to notice, this is a very short-term chart. This is a 1-minute chart. And on the 23rd, notice that the stock is trading very quietly and normally. There's very little volume. And then it comes alive with abnormal volume on the 24th. And then it really starts to go because it doesn't have a lot of shares outstanding. It is very actively traded. It's a low price stock. And because you've got a big crowd chasing after a small number of shares, this stock can make these big price gains. I think it went up, 300-400% in that single day. And it went even higher last week, as it had another wave in this run. So if you want to find the hot stocks, focus on abnormal volume, abnormal price action. Look for stocks that surprise the market with strength. Look for stocks that have a low float, and look for stocks that are very actively traded, that have strong liquidity. Those are the stocks that give you your best bet. Final note, do not listen to what people say about these stocks. What people say in their words on Twitter, on Reddit, is often just hype. And if you listen to it, you will get caught up in the story and you won't sell the stock when the market tells you to sell, because you'll believe in the story. You'll fall in love with the stock. Falling in love with stocks is deadly. Never ever do it. I don't care if you're talking about Nvidia or some 20-cent stock. Just do what the market tells you to do. If the trend is up, ride the trend. If it breaks down and starts to move lower, get out of the stock. It's that simple. All right, let's get into this week's market analysis, because it's always important to understand where the market is going, even if you're trading these alpha stocks, because every stock has some correlation to the market. Now, an alpha stock has less of a correlation, but they're still going to be affected by the overall market. So we want to have a sense of what the overall market is doing so we can tailor our approach to the market. And that's why I do this review every week. So we're going to jump into my website, stockscores.com. And first chart up here is the S&P 500. And you can see that the trend on the long-term chart, this is the 3-year weekly chart, is up. So the buyers are in control. I would say momentum is slowing a little bit. The buyers maybe not as enthusiastic as they were toward the end of 2023 and into the first part of 2024, but still the trend is up. If we look at the short-term chart, relatively strong. We had a pullback this week, but then right at the end of the day on Friday, we had this little rally. And what that did was allow the market to hold its upward trend line. So if I draw this upward trend line across these bottoms, this is the 2-hour chart. Okay, you can see that we bounced off of that, and that keeps the trend alive. Let's jump to the NASDAQ QQQ, which kind of underperformed the S&P last week. You can see a little bit more of a sell-off, but it too still holds the upward trend line. And so the buyers are still in control of these large cap stocks, and therefore they generally remain holds. Now, of course, there's always going to be one stock that looks better than another, but generally the large cap stocks look pretty good. When we switch to the small cap market, we see a little different scenario, because there you can see that this is not really in that strong upward trend. It has been, the small cap market, has been more or less sideways for the last 6 months. And the real factor there is the bond market and interest rates. And then later in the video, I'll show you the interest rate chart and you'll see why this is dragging down these small cap stocks, because they tend to have more of a correlation to interest rates than the large cap stocks do. But looking at the short-term time frame, we have been drifting lower for the last 2 weeks or so, but on Friday we started to break that little downward trend line after building a rising bottom. So that should lead to higher prices next week and maybe the next 2 weeks. And so I think trading conditions will improve. They've been a little bit quiet the last 2 weeks because we've been trending lower. But if we can go back into this short-term upward trend like we had late in April and the first half of May, we should have a good June, and we'll see if that materializes next week. Moving along to the Canadian market, T.XIU is the symbol, and the 3-year weekly chart still in an upward trend, but like the large cap US stocks, losing a little bit of its momentum. You can see it's been a bit choppy in the last couple of weeks, but that downward trend line was broken right at the end of the day on Friday, so that should give some stability. This is more of a neutral trend on the TSX in the short term, but still long-term bullish. GLD, gold, has had a great run in the last 6 months, let's say, but in the last month, it's been more or less sideways, and a little bit of extra weakness last week, which I'm a bit concerned about. We haven't broken down yet, but we are flirting with breaking that upward trend line on the daily chart. So I think you got to be cautious with gold here. It could see a little more pain in the next little while. Now, silver and gold obviously have some correlation. If we look at that 1 month, 2-hour chart of silver, it is also breaking that upward trend after making a double top. And again, that's a very short-term chart, but just be a little bit cautious with the precious metals next week. Now, of course, OPEC is meeting, and that will have an influence on oil prices. You can see the long-term chart of oil is generally good, not great. It's been pretty much sideways, but it is building rising bottoms, which is a sign of optimism. It needs to break through this resistance zone before we can get a real, upward trend in oil. When we look at the 1 month chart, the sellers are still in control. So in the short term, we have a downward trend. We do seem to be making this sort of triple bottom here. And so if we could break that downward trend line, and perhaps the OPEC meeting will be a catalyst for that, that'll be a positive in the short term. But I don't think oil looks all that exciting. It's just starting to show some potential to turn soon. All right, moving along, let's take a look at that bond. Actually, let's take a look at the currencies first. UUP is the US dollar. And if we look at the 1 month chart, you can see it's kind of drifting lower, but I would say it's neutral. GBTC, which is our Bitcoin chart, obviously had a very strong run, parabolic run. And usually when trends go parabolic, they take some time to come back to the trend line. They either come back by going sideways, which is what's happened so far over the last 2.5 months. It's basically been going sideways. But we could really pull back all that way. I don't see a reason for that yet. We need to see a break of this upward trend line. We do have a falling top. So I want you to be a little bit cautious with Bitcoin. If we look at the 1 month chart, it's neutral, but some falling tops building. And so what you want to watch for is, do we break down through that $59 range on GBTC from these falling tops that are building? That could lead to some lower prices. So exercise a bit of caution with Bitcoin. It's not negative yet, but it could get negative next week. Finally, the bond market chart, TLT. Here's the 3-year weekly, and you can see we're in a downward trend. So for those small cap stocks, and really optimism in general, for that to come into the market, we need to break this downward trend line. Now what's good is we've built a rising bottom on the weekly, and so all we have to do is break the downward trend line. There is still no sign that the market expects interest rates to start to drop. We had actually pretty good selling at the start of the week in the bond market. It came back from being oversold to coming back up to the trend line there. So very short term, quite a bit of volatility, and that shows that there's a fair bit of uncertainty going on in the bond market. So my ratings then, bullish on both time frames for large cap stocks in the US, the NASDAQ and large cap stocks. Small cap, neutral. Canadian stocks, short-term neutral, long-term bullish. Gold, same story, short-term neutral, long-term bullish. Oil, bearish in the short term, but neutral in the long term. And then US dollar, Bitcoin, and bonds, neutral on all time frames. And really kind of a quiet market, but every week we're seeing a few of these hot stocks that I talked about at the top of the video that are making these massive moves. And I think that's where the action is in the market. Day trading and swing trading these stocks, we're doing that every day in the Stockscores Active Live room. You can learn more about that at my website, stockscores.com. Now, let's get into the trade of the week to emphasize what I talked about at the top of the video about hot stocks and their characteristics. So BNAI was probably the best trader on Friday. Low float, extremely abnormal, extremely liquid, and low priced. It had all of those things that we talked about. You can see here the abnormal activity coming in to the stock, not right from the start of the day. It took a little bit before it got going, but there you can see the abnormal price action, abnormal volume. It triggered my action candle indicators on multiple time frames early in the day, so that's how we found it to watch. And then it was just a matter of waiting for an entry point. I like to buy stocks when they break from good patterns, and so we had a break from a little pennant pattern here, right in here, and that led to this big move going from roughly $4 to $8, 100% gain. This is what hot stocks are all about. Very liquid. You can buy it very quickly in and out. Large position sizes were quite easy because it's that hot stock that has all of those characteristics that I talked about at the top of the video. Now, if you like this thing, if you found this video educational, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel. The more people subscribe, the more people get to watch these videos. I'm on a bit of a mission to inform retail investors, everyday investors, on how the stock market really works and how you can make money from it by not doing what most people do. And that's what this is all about. So like the video, subscribe, and most importantly, trade well. We'll see you next week.